We made this.
Welcome to Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming a new guest today, and that is Nick Frame. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Still recovering from a a slight cold, but yeah, apart from that, not too bad.
I've got there's probably something in the air because I'm starting to come down with a slight cold myself.
Yeah, we both live in the same part of Japan, and there's
Mhm.
definitely something going around at the moment.
Yeah, it's and yeah, my son had it last night. It seemed like he was fussy last night, and now it seems like he's passed it on to me because I was up with him.
Yeah, my kids had something last week as well, and I think they've finally decided to give it to dad. So yeah, so
So
that's
this
yeah.
so this is your first time on the show, so why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Nick Frame. I kind of I got started in within cinema maybe 13, 14 years ago when I was asked to collaborate on some Arrow video, DVD and Blu-ray sets that they were making, mainly for like Italian, exploitation cinema. They
Mhm.
needed somebody. They needed somebody to do some on-stage translation for two directors that were coming over, which were Lamberto Bava and Ruggero Deodato, who made Cannibal Holocaust famously.
Mm.
And so they were coming over to Scotland when I was living over there, and uh, I did the translation for them on stage, and it went well, and so work kind of snowballed, and I started to do more and more like DVD extras, interviews and featurettes, and then I started to work directly for Arrow Video while still doing a lot of like independent um, featurettes for people like 88 Films and Shout Factory and things like that. So yeah, so that's
So
where
you
I got started
so
in the
you
movie side of things.
so you do translations for them?
Yeah, well, that's how it kind of started. I started just doing a lot of these Q&As with the directors. They were all being filmed for DVD extras, so they didn't really speak that good English, so they needed me to do the on-stage translation. And then it snowballed to us going to Italy, going to Rome, and meeting people like Dario Argento and Sergio Martino, doing interviews with them, filming interviews. I did most of the interviews in Italian, and then we would get back to the UK, and then I would sit and create subtitles for all these releases, which was time consuming. But the joy of actually getting to meet these people was fabulous.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
pretty cool. And
Yep.
so you speak Italian then too?
I do, yeah, I'm completely, I would say more or less completely bilingual with, English and Italian. Um, but still, I mean, you sit down and you would do these interviews with people, and sometimes my family is from like Tuscany, so which is further north, and a lot of these guys were down in Rome, and sometimes they would use slightly different terms or slightly different dialect than I was used to, and I used to have to sit and think about, well, what actually do they mean here? Maybe
Hmm.
not people like Dario Argento, he's very well spoken, but some other there's a lot of special effects guys. We used to go and interview them in like deepest, darkest Rome in the middle of the countryside, and yeah, it was usually a challenge a few weeks later to sit down and watch the footage and kind
Yeah,
of work out what they were actually trying to say.
yeah. I've been in those situations a few times. Like
Mm.
with my wife going over to America and translating stuff she says for my family, or translating stuff my family says into Japanese for her, and it's a definite it's a much different experience as opposed to when you've got the time to sit down and refer to a dictionary if you need to.
Well, sure, you can. Yeah, if you when you're sitting doing subtitles on the computer, yeah, you've got your time to look things up and listen to it 5 or 6 times. Hard thing
Mhm.
is doing it when it's on stage though, in front of 200, 300 people
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
You've got somebody in the audience who's asking a long, rambling question, and you've got to remember everything they just said, then translate it to Italian and make it make sense to the Italian speaker. Wait for that answer, then translate it back. But I actually I enjoyed it. a few of the directors, Deodato said that I was the best he'd ever come across. That was being able to like do it on the fly, and he's done festivals,
Mhm.
all over the world. So that was quite a nice thing for him to say. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's a tough thing. I tell most of my students at one of the schools I teach at, they are
Mm.
they're interested in like translation and interpretation and all that, and telling them like there's a difference between being able to translate and being able to interpret. They're two very different skills. So
Yeah, you can't translate it literally because it doesn't make sense, and then
does not know.
it does not make sense. Then you have to kind of you kind of have to almost change what the question the person's asked you to make it
Mhm.
make sense to the non-English speaker. So,
Right,
but it was always
and
it was
and
always
when you're
fun.
doing it and when you're doing it live too, then there's the added pressure of having all that time and having to do it like right
Do,
away.
Doing it live, but also know it's being filmed for
Yeah,
an extra
yeah,
feature. So that you can't like say, can we go again? You can't do that.
yeah,
So then
exactly. Yeah.
you just have to make it work. And to be fair, people like Diodato and Lamberto Bava were very funny, and their stories were amazing.
Mhm.
So it was always good fun. And it was even when you did interviews, they would tell you stories sometimes, and you go, oh, "That was an amazing story. We can't put this on the disc though," because they would usually be like just telling a terrible story about a fellow actor that we can't put that on the disc. So, but it was always good. It was always good fun.
So you're still working for Arrow now? Is that why you ended up coming over to Japan?
No, no, no. So sorry. No, no. I don't work for Arrow now. The reason I'm
Oh,
in
okay. I'm
Japan
sorry.
is no, 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 no. My wife's Japanese from Kagoshima. Like 4 or 5 years ago, we decided that we wanted to kind of make a change, and we thought about moving over to Japan. Didn't really like the way things were going in the UK due
Hmm.
to Brexit and Britain leaving the European Union. And we just thought the kids were young enough that if we didn't do it now, then we would probably never do it.
Yeah, yeah,
So we planned it and we came over, and by and large, everything's been, apart from Corona hitting 6 months after we arrived, it's been good. It's been a good experience.
yeah. That's a you got in just in time because
Just,
if you had just
just
been like a few months later, you would have been screwed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would have thrown off all our plans if we
Mhm.
couldn't have got into the country. So yeah, but it made things difficult. But Japan wasn't that badly affected. So
No, not too bad. It
yeah,
was more just the if you were if you were outside the country and trying to get in and you weren't a Japanese national, or if you were inside the country and then you left for a period of time at all, then you wouldn't be able to get back in. So that was the main thing.
exactly. Yeah, that
Like
was
we
the
had
worry. Is like, yeah, if you had to leave, you thought, well, will I get back in? Even though I'm married to a Japanese national, you just don't know.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, and at first they weren't letting us back in. Like I remember that was one of the reasons when my daughter was born, right in the middle of all that. And it was
Mm.
just kind of like, telling my family and back home, it's like, you guys can't come here. They won't let you in. And I can't risk leaving the country right now because I
No,
don't know if I'll be able to get back in.
totally, totally. So that was my worry. I was like, nobody get ill, nobody have an emergency because I can't guarantee that I can come over.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Fortunately, it did. They had lifted that restriction by the time of my sister's wedding, so we were able to go over there, and they were able to meet my daughter. And then we just went back over in the summer again for a second time so they could meet my son. So everything ended up working out
That's good.
on our end of the ways. Yeah. So we ended up being getting things done right around the edges, just about. We did have some
Okay.
quarantine struggles coming back in, though. That was a pain in the
Okay,
ass.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I went back to Italy in the summer, and that was the first time I'd been back to Europe at all since I moved
Mhm.
over, but it was fine because everything was, essentially normal.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. The summer it was fine. Coming back into Japan, we had no problems coming back in at all.
no, nothing.
Um,
It was easy.
but yeah, last time we went, it was like about a year, 2 years ago. Now, almost 2 years ago, and that was we had to do quarantine for a week at the airport under the government restriction, and then they wouldn't let us travel for a week too. So we were stuck in Tokyo, and we had to stay in a hotel at our own expense for a week, basically in Tokyo. Um,
Yeah, that
so
must
yeah,
have
that
been
was
tough.
struggle. Fortunately, my mom had hotel connections, so we were able to deal with it okay. But yeah, it was just annoying and frustrating just having to go through all that and just like the
For
daily
sure.
tests and all that.
Yeah.
um, So what is it you're doing in Japan now then?
So, my main job has always been like digital marketing. So
Hmm.
I still kind of work for my main client that I had in the UK, and I've also got like a side agency as well with an Italian friend of mine. So we've got a bunch of clients that we look after. It's a fairly easy job to do remotely, thankfully.
Hmm.
And I'm a bit like yourself. I because of Corona, I got asked to do some like teaching work because they were
Hmm.
struggling because nobody could get into the country, and there weren't many proper native like schools here. They only like maybe Canadian or American or British speakers.
Right.
So I got asked to do it. So I do a lot of teaching in and around Ira City, uh, and I thought it would only be for a little while, but I actually enjoy it. I enjoy working with like the kids and the students here. So I do it. So I split my time between teaching and digital marketing.
That's good. 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 So
Mm.
how do you like being in Kagoshima?
I do. I really like it. I'd always liked it. When we visited on like vacation and things like that with my wife. And I kind of used to say to myself, I wish there was a way we could live here, like but obviously with a job and you know
Hmm.
not speaking Japanese fluently. I thought it's never going to happen. But due to how my work was going with work, I thought I can work remotely. I know my old company were okay with me like moving and still contributing that way, which was very lucky. They could have said
Hmm.
no. I think we'd have still gone, but it would have made it harder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I overall I really like it. I like the way of life. I like the peace and quiet, and I think overall we're better off over
Hmm.
here, maybe
Yeah.
compared to the UK. I don't know about yourself. I don't know about yourself compared to the
No,
US, but
I feel a lot of the same way. I mean, I've been here now for about 15 years now,
yeah,
and I mean, I've been I spent like 6 months in Ehime. I tried going back to the States for 6 months too, but it was just like I miss being in when I was back in the States. I miss being in Japan, and then when I went back to when I went to Ehime and got a job there, I miss being in Kagoshima. So first chance I got for a job opening back here, I moved right back here, and it's just
sure.
it's I can't. I think a friend of mine once called it the best kept secret in Japan is Kagoshima because,
Yeah, yeah, I
I've
agree
really
with
come to
you.
feel like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I had
definitely.
some of my friends when they were living in Yokohama. They came down and they visited, and they were just, they were just blown away by how much they enjoyed being out here. And it's just, yeah, it's such a nice area. It's very convenient, especially you're in Kirishima, which is not that far away from me. I used to live there too, and
Yeah,
it's a nice area. It's not too big, but it's still convenient. There's a lot of stuff around there. Same thing where I live too. It's very convenient area, and it much cheaper than other areas of Japan, and even other and especially compared to where I'm from, Chicago, because we went back to visit in the summer and just the prices of things, we were just like
uh-huh.
shocked by how much more expensive everything is in America compared to out here.
Yeah. But I was braced for everyone used to say to me, "Oh, but Japan's so expensive. It's so expensive." And to be fair, you don't know for sure until you actually get here. But I remember
Mhm.
getting the first couple of like water bills and gas bills. I'm like, is this all it is? I mean, my water bill is like, I used to live I'm from Scotland originally, and Scotland and England are actually quite different. I think everyone just lumps the UK in as one like country, but it really isn't. So in Scotland, you don't pay for your water. England, you do pay for your water. And when I used to live in London, my bill was like obscene, maybe
Mhm.
like $200 a month for water. Here, it's like barely 3,000 yen a month, and I couldn't believe it. I
Yeah.
thought it was a mistake. I thought it was a mistake. So I was pleasantly surprised at how cheap it was to live here, generally.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's I mean, yeah, if you're in somewhere like Tokyo, it's gonna be more expensive, and I think
Of
that's
course,
mostly
of
what
course.
people think of, and plus, if you're going to, like, touristy places, they're gonna be very expensive, right? There
Of course,
everything's
of course.
the prices are all inflated there. Plus, if you want
Yeah,
stuff like, I mean, pizza here is far more expensive than it is in, like, the US, so those types of
of
things
course.
are gonna be a lot more
Yeah,
expensive, but everything else, like, basic daily necessities for the most part much cheaper than in America, and especially like the cost of living, the rent here. I mean,
yeah.
we rent a house. Granted, it's an old house, but it's in a convenient
Mm,
location, and it's like 50,000 yen a month, which is roughly about like I don't know 475 dollars US.
mm. Yeah, maybe
You
not even that.
cannot, maybe not even that. I mean, you cannot find. You'd be lucky to find a studio apartment for that price in the Chicagoland area.
Totally, totally. It's the same for the UK. I mean, to buy a house in the UK is just obscene. If you want to buy somewhere decent, it's obscene. Even
Yeah,
Scotland, which never used to be as bad as the rest of England, yeah, and it's very difficult.
yeah, and plus, with the kids, we get so many benefits from having kids here because we get subsidies from the government for
Yeah,
them. We get my daughter gets to do preschool for free starting in the
yeah,
spring because she's gonna be 3 years old, and
yeah.
my son gets to go for if we can get them in the same preschool. My son would get to go for half the tuition because he's under three,
Mm.
but we've already got a child enrolled there, so then they discount it for other
That's right.
children in your family.
The same for my son went to Yochen here, and then I managed to get my daughter into the same school, and but for her it's completely free when she
Yeah,
started. So and it's really good school. It's
yeah,
fantastic. So
yeah. And plus, I don't have to worry about I mean, this isn't a concern in Scotland or or in England, but in America, the thing we're always terrified about is some
sure.
nutcase is going to come and shoot up the school. Something
Well,
I never have to worry
well,
about here.
yeah, you wouldn't. It doesn't even cross your mind here.
Hmm.
General crime doesn't even cross your mind because it just doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
happen. Yeah.
yeah. So it's so much more convenient. I mean, there are problems with it, like there's no Shangri La
Of
and all
course.
that, but yeah,
Oh,
overall, I mean, it's so much more. It's so much more convenient. It's so much cheaper. I mean, granted, that's because
maybe.
the salaries are also like
Yeah.
far lower than the developed world, but
Yeah,
it's
but you
it's
don't. Yeah, you don't need it
you
as
don't
much.
notice it. Yeah, exactly.
You
Right.
don't.
You don't notice it
You don't.
if you don't have to spend that much. Yeah.
And you'll
Um.
notice that medical fees as well are so small
Oh
to go
yeah.
to the
Yeah.
doctor. Yeah. As an American,
When we
it's be amazing.
Oh yeah, we had travel insurance when we went back to the States, and it was like $200 for the four of us. And my son got sick while we were there, so we took him in, checked him out, and then uh and at first they're like, okay, you're fine. You don't have to pay anything, no copay or anything. Okay, great. And like 2 months later, my mom got a bill from them for like 200, an extra $200.
Mm.
So it was weird. Yeah. So like I think it was for COVID. It was for COVID testing, and for like I got COVID when I had COVID. I got it tested here, and I got it. The test was like $40.
Yeah, yeah, it's cheap. So
Yeah. So it's much different in terms of healthcare costs and all over stuff.
totally, totally.
But anyway, so we're talking Japanese movie podcast, and so you kind of hinted at that you had started to get into Japanese movies through your work with Arrow, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think it goes back further than that. I think I remember I think the first proper Japanese movie I'd bought. It was anime. I think my grandfather bought me Akira on VHS, and I'd heard about it, and I think before that the only anime I'd been into had been like TV shows. Uh, in the UK, we had no anime on TV whatsoever. There was just it was just it just didn't they just didn't show it. I don't know what the reason was, but they never showed it. And I used to spend every summer in Italy, and that was different. That was like maybe the number one country for Japanese anime. I don't know if you're aware of this, but
No, I was
they
not
go
aware of that.
they went during the 80s and the early 90s. They just went crazy for anime. So I used to spend every summer there, and because of the heat, it's just much like Japan. You can't be outside at lunchtime. So between like 1 and 4, Italian TV was just wall to wall anime. So I started to watch things like Fist of the North Star and every robot based anime you
Mm,
can possibly imagine, like Gundam and Mazinger Z, and soccer anime like Captain Tsubasa. So Yatarman. So all this amazing anime that maybe at the time I didn't appreciate how good or bad it was, but
mhm.
I knew I liked it. And then as I got a little bit older, I had started to read, about Akira was being talked about. Again, difficult to see back in days of no streaming, and you know, foreign movies weren't overly available. So yeah, it
Mhm.
started with Akira, and then I think I moved on to watch like a lot of Miyazaki. I still like My Neighbor Totoro even to this day, and generally most of his output. And then I
Hmm.
started to watch Kurosawa samurai movies and so on and so on. When I was at Arrow, I I was the one I said to them they should start putting out Pinky Violence movies.
Hmm.
Uh, and they said no, 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 nobody will watch that. And then when I left, somebody they did put it out and I went, oh, what a great idea that was. And I was like, yeah, I think I mentioned that. Yeah, that used to happen quite a lot, Arrow. I used to mention things and then people were like, no. And then 2 months later, it was somebody else's great idea, and they were like, oh, how amazing for thinking of that. And I'm like, dude, I said that a month ago. So yeah, yeah, I'm not going to go on an Arrow rant, but yeah, there's a few random things used to happen there that you don't understand.
It,
Yeah,
I'm not sure if they're a Japanese owned company or not, but it definitely sounds like a Japanese kind of mentality because I see that happen at my work sometimes where it's like, oh, we should do this. It's like, I don't think we're going to do that. And then a few years later, they're like, oh, we should do this idea that you suggested 2 years ago and we just thought about
yeah,
it now. Yeah.
yeah. No, no, they definitely weren't Japanese, but they had a lot. They had the rights to a lot of Japanese stuff.
Mm,
But you're right. I mean, for example, I think when I joined, I think Synapse or another American company were doing like double bills, and they were starting to put out sort of their sort of version of like Pinky Violence movies. And I
hmm.
said, we should do like a double bill. Some of these people aren't maybe going to spend the money in one film they've never heard of, but two with some extras. That might work. Nah, I don't think so. 2 months later, it's somebody else's
I
idea.
mean,
So,
I was exactly that kind of person because I remember when I was still in the States and like in university, and I'd see like these double pack or 3 packs at Best Buy of like Tartan or Arrow and all this, and like
yeah,
you know, and it's just kind of like well, if it was just this one movie, maybe I wouldn't have bought it, but it's 2 movies, it's like $15 or something, and they both look kind of interesting, so I'm like, yeah, I'll take a chance on them. So yeah, it's
yeah.
I mean, yeah, I used to do that all the time. A lot of my Asian DVDs were built up with those kinds of sales tactics.
I was the same. Again, you're never buying one, but you'll buy a collection and take
Yeah.
a risk on it. So yeah. I
Well,
think
in
I
fact,
remember when I went to New York. Yeah, yeah. No, no, no.
I mean,
You go.
sorry, yeah. I mean, just today, I was doing we were recording another episode about Colt is My Passport, and the only reason I
Hmm.
own that movie is because it was part of a Criterion 4 pack. Called Nikatsu Nor, and had like this, or 4 or 5 movies. It's like this
Okay.
collection of like
Hmm.
4 or 5 movies, and it was like $20 at when I saw it at Barnes and Noble or something. So I'm like, yeah, of course I'll buy
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
for $20, 5 movies, of course.
Of course. I remember going to New York and I went to Mondo Kim's, which is like a famous DVD store back in the day. I don't know if
Hmm.
it exists anymore. One of these cool places where it was just all like cult movies, exploitation, and they used to have like proper shelves with like Criterion, Kurosawa, Argento. I mean, amazing. And I remember, I think Panic House, which is a company from a few years ago, had brought out a Pinky Violence set, and it was 80. It
Hmm.
was $80, and I didn't know any of the movies, but the box was this lurid, like pink collection, fold out with like 5 discs in it, full of extras and stickers and booklets. And you're going,
Hmm.
well, I'm buying that.
Yeah,
I'm interested in this type of cinema. You know, $80, I'll buy it. So yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, they definitely good thing they finally got around to it, um,
yeah,
but yeah, I remember Arrow back in the day too, doing a lot of those Japanese films. I've got a lot of those Arrow issued DVDs still, and the Tartan ones as well. They were the source of a lot of the movies that I
yeah.
bought back then,
That's right.
back when DVDs were
Tartan,
still
yeah,
a thing.
that's right. At the time, Tartan were the only label really putting out anything,
Mhm.
Japanese and anything slightly different. I think they maybe brought out Audition for the first time, I think, in the UK. They may have put that
Oh,
out.
in the
So
UK, okay, yeah. I'm not sure who
yeah,
did it. I don't think it
UK.
was. Yeah, I'm not sure who did it in the US. I think it was just because Audition was kind of like my first introduction to Miike, and that was I remember it perfectly. I was in university. I was on the it was and my first year in university, I lived on campus, but I went home almost every weekend because I lived like an hour away.
Mm,
This one weekend, I decided I'll stay here. I'm gonna order a pizza and I'll just rent a movie from Blockbuster and just chill out in my dorm room. And I'm looking in Blockbuster and I'm looking at the movies and I see Audition on the new release wall. And it's got the cover of this cute Japanese girl holding up this syringe and dressed in these like
Yeah,
leather
yeah.
gloves, and I'm just like, and I read the back of it, and I'm just like, all right, this sounds like a schlocky, stupid horror movie. Maybe I mean I'll watch. Yeah, I'll watch it. I'll have some fun with this, and then I'll get to laugh at it, and maybe it'll have some nude scenes or something like that I can kind of titillate. And then I sat
Yeah.
in my dorm room. I ate my pizza and I watched it. And by the time that movie was over, I just cracked open a can of Mountain Dew because I'm like, I am not fucking sleeping tonight.
I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if I bought this on DVD from like a Hong Kong import place, or I went to the movies to see it. I can't actually remember. I think I watched it on DVD, and I think I didn't know. The good thing is I didn't know too much about it, and I just heard it was good. And I'm really into horror, like Italian horror and things like that, and I'm always looking for good movies from other countries in terms of horror. And I just heard, oh, this is good, this is good. I've heard a few people say you need to watch this, and I didn't know. I don't think I knew anything about it. And the movie's quiet for the first half an hour. Like not a
Mhm.
lot happens. There's just the guy that's trying to meet. Sets up the fake audition to meet the girl, and then suddenly, the piano wire comes out, and you're just like, holy shit!
Yeah.
It was. I think I saw it. Do you know what it was? I think I saw it a second time with an audience, and that bit where she throws his foot and it hits something, and you could the whole place just shit their pants. You know.
It was funny. I watched that scene. I watched that movie with my best friend, and she's not a horror person, but she doesn't really get scared easily. When she threw that foot, my friend burst out laughing.
Okay.
It was like the funniest. It was the most boisterous laugh I ever heard come out of her.
Yeah. Well, the audience I watched it with were like totally shocked.
Mm.
I don't think they didn't know it was. I knew it was coming. They didn't know it was coming.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, but
Yeah,
so was that your first Miike film as well?
I'm thinking now that it might have been. I'm not too sure. It might have been actually. Come to think of it, yeah, I think it
Mhm.
might have been my first UK film. He's done. He's done so many, and sometimes you look at something and go, "Oh shit, that's Miike. I didn't know that."
Yeah, yeah.
But I think I mentioned to you, I used to watch the anime called Yatarman, which was like kids anime back in the day. And then I realized there was a live action version, and I didn't even look. I don't think I even looked at the director. I just thought it'd be some random, and then I saw it was Miike, and I'm like, really? He's making like a live action anime
Mhm.
adaptation. I don't know. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's amazing.
No, I
Um,
haven't seen that, but he's done a bunch of other adaptations of stuff. Like he did the Crow Zero movies, both of those which are
yes,
based on well, not anime, those are based on manga, but also
yes.
Yakuza, the based on the video game. He did that adaptation too.
Oh, that's right. That's
Um
right. Yeah.
a bunch of other ones too. Oh,
Does he?
Blade of the
I mean,
Immortal. I think he also did that one as
yeah,
well.
that's right. That's right. That's right. I
Yeah.
think. I think. I think I started to watch more after that. I watched Visitor Q, which obviously is completely fucked up. So
Yeah, that
again,
was one I watched, and I don't think that's one I'm gonna ever be watching again. That was a little
no.
bit, that was a little bit too fucked up for me. I think that I found my
Yeah,
line with that movie.
yeah. There's certain movies like you watch it and you go, well, I'm not watching that again. It's a bit like Cannibal
Mhm.
Holocaust, a bit like Salo, the Italian movie, the 120
Mhm.
Days of Sodom. Again, you watch it once because it's a movie to watch, and then you go, right, well, I don't think I need to see that again.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a nice transition into the movie we're talking about today, which is
Yeah.
Sukiyaki Western Django. Same title in Japanese as well, just rendered in katakana from
Hmm.
2007. And this is, I remember seeing the trailer of this, but I don't think I actually watched it until I'd come to Japan because I found it on DVD like really cheap. I came here in 2008, so
Okay.
and so it was
Okay.
already, and I'm not sure when it was released in the states, but I know by the time I came here in 2008, it had been on DVD already, so I bought it, um and I was surprised when I looked at the DVD because it said that it was um the on the back it said that it was in English with Japanese subtitles. I'm like,
Yes.
wait, do they have that? Do they have that the other way around? It's Japanese with English subtitles that a misprint on the DVD case or something. But then I
Mhm.
watched it and yeah, I was really kind of surprised that it is all English dialogue, but
Yeah.
but then subtitled in Japanese, at least here in Japan. And in the West, it was
Yeah.
subtitled in English because it was difficult to understand some of the
Well,
dialogue.
I rewatched it obviously for the podcast, and I, I, it does throw you the first 20 minutes because
Mhm.
I don't think even though they're speaking English, I don't think you can totally grasp actually what they're saying because you just
Mhm.
don't expect it. And I think I watched it with my wife because she was curious, and you could, and she pointed out that you could tell straight away the actors that were good at English, or maybe half American, half Japanese, or
Mhm.
people that were just obviously really had to study to learn it in the movie. So sometimes I felt that kind of took you out of the movie a little bit, at least at the beginning, because some people's English is pretty natural and good, and some people's is other actors was harder to understand.
Yeah, I had felt the exact same way. I mean, that's one of the common criticisms of this movie is the fact that it's got
Yeah.
that it's difficult to understand it, and it it the actors are forced to do a lot of work performing in English, whereas opposed to if they were doing it in Japanese, they wouldn't have to worry so much about getting the language right. They could focus more on their performance.
Hmm.
But I remember when I first saw the trailer, I was really excited about it because it's Takashi Miike. He's doing this fusion of Western and samurai, and
Yeah.
it looked really cool. And it still does. Like it does look really cool. But I gotta be honest, when I saw the movie, I was a little bit let down by what had come out because it just didn't. It's not as good as I felt it could have been, especially after
I agree
seeing
with
some
you.
other. Yeah,
I think I was
because
the same as you. I saw the trailer, I saw Tarantino, and I thought, oh, a spaghetti western sort of samurai movie fusion by Miike. I thought, well, this is going to be absolutely, amazing. And it does have its moments, but I
hmm
tend to agree with you. I felt I was, and and the nice thing is, it did capture elements of actual Italian spaghetti westerns. I don't know how well you
yeah,
know that genre itself, but I mean, the look and the feel and the music and just certain things and certain elements that happen in the movie. Echo, Fistful of Dollars, the
hmm
snow at the end echoes The Great Silence. Another Sergio Corbucci movie who directed the original Italian version of Django. So he also did his research and
hmm
uh, he cherry picked the nice aesthetics from the Italian films. But and the action is fantastic, but it does drag a little bit. I feel at stages, and especially when there's long periods of dialogue because they're speaking English. I think that's maybe the reason that it drags a little bit.
So there are two versions of this movie. There's the Japanese version, which is 2 hours, and then Miike had the film edited down to 98 minutes for international release. So which
Mhm.
version did you watch for this?
I watched the long version, the 2 hour version.
Okay, yeah, so did I, and I think that's and I've never seen the international version, but I'm curious now to go and see it to see if that improves the pacing because Miike had edited it himself, so it's not like the case with like a lot of Japanese movies that or foreign movies that go out to in the states when Miramax used to do a lot of
Yeah,
those releases. They would cut them to shit so much so that when
yeah,
I think it was
yeah.
when yeah
I knew
Miyazaki
you were
when
going to
he
say Miramax. No, no, I knew you were going to say Miramax because he loved to muck about with other people's movies.
yeah, but with Miyazaki, even with Princess Mononoke, I think it was he had included like a either an actual samurai sword or a picture of a samurai sword with the movie and said like no cuts.
Okay.
And yes, and so that was like I think that was like one of the only times when they had released it without any editing. But I'm thinking about the Japanese version of Shall We Dance. Like when I first saw that, I saw the American version, and yeah, it was okay, it was enjoyable. But when I saw the Japanese version, the full length one, I realized like how much important character detail was cut out of the American version.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was the same as you when I was reading the background of the movie. I didn't know there was a international cut of this film. I just thought I think any version I've ever watched has always been the 2 hour. I
Mhm.
just didn't know it existed.
Yeah. So that's something I'd be curious to see is to go and check out the original one because it does drag in certain parts. And I think the biggest sin this movie does is by forcing the actors to speak English, it really robs them of the ability to really be kind of authentic in their roles. I mean, there are actors who do a really good
Mhm.
job of it.
Oh,
Hideaki
they are.
Ito,
They're
who
good.
plays the gunman, and Yusuke Isaya, who plays Yoshitsune, the head of the Genji clan, I think.
Hmm.
They both have pretty good English, and also the two female characters.
Yeah.
So we have Kaori Momoi and who's that? Yoshino Kimura. Both of them actually studied in England, so their command of English is also pretty good. But
Hmm.
everybody else, it's very difficult to understand what they're saying. Like Koichi Sato, who played Kiyomori, I had a lot of trouble trying to follow him and his what he
Yeah.
was
Me
saying
too.
in the movie.
Hmm. Well, that's what I'm saying. I think for action scenes and quick scenes, it doesn't really matter. But when they actually
Mm-hmm.
get into dialogue, you know it would have been better in their natural language. But conversely, you could kind of say that, and maybe not deliberately, but Mickey, when you watch Italian exploitation movies, the dubbing and the voices are always all over the place anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because there was no live audio recorded on set. So it kind of like, it's not deliberate, of course, but it kind of like there's like a similarity to like Italian exploitation movies by having slightly jilted audio, but I know that's not what he was going for,
Well,
but it kind of
it's also
kind of
kind of
works.
like the in the spaghetti westerns too, right? They had the same thing where they
Yeah,
were
same
originally
thing, same thing.
filmed in Italian and then they dubbed them over in English, and you can
They
there's an
don't.
incongruency when you watch those versions sometimes.
Yeah. Well, they weren't even filmed in Italian. They were filmed in whatever language the actor spoke, and then
Oh, I see.
uh, okay, Clint Eastwood would always speak English, but if he was acting again with a Spanish actor, for example, he would speak Spanish. The Italian would speak Italian, and then afterwards, everything was just dubbed over into Italian, into Spanish, into English, and so on and so on. So
Oh.
that's how it worked. And on most Italian productions, whether it was exploitation or whatever, they all basically work that way. And that wasn't something I knew until I actually started to speak to a lot of these directors, and they said, yeah, if we had an English, sometimes these movies would bring over a big American star, but again, he was just told, say your lines in English. It doesn't really matter anyway because we're
Mhm.
dubbing over.
I think that would have been a much better way to go about it. Like if Miike had given the actors a choice, like if you're comfortable doing the lines in English, do them in English. But if you're more comfortable doing them in Japanese, then do them in Japanese.
Yeah,
And I think it would have made
yeah,
for a little bit more. It would have allowed for a little bit more authenticity in their performances.
yes, I agree. I agree with you because, as you said, the two female characters their English was excellent, and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could tell that they studied it in their private life, so they spoke it anyway. So
yeah. And so what do you think of kind of the story of the movie? Because like we did talk about how it had dragged on. I mean, I did think there's some interesting things here where it's kind of like this. It's almost like a fantasy version of Japan because they reference the Danouda and the gate the rivalry between the Genji and the Heike, but
yeah,
they
yeah, and
they're in a
they
town
were
called Nevada.
yeah, yeah, and those clans were real. They're from the
Mhm.
1100s, I think, in Japan. Those two clans. So yeah, yeah, they were trying to mix in the aesthetics of a spaghetti western with like elements of like Japanese history. I mean, I like the way they had guns and samurai swords. I
Yeah,
thought that
yeah.
was I thought that was cool, and I like the way they used bits from Django with the machine gun and the coffin. And
Mhm.
all. I mean, to me, it played out, despite being full of Japanese actors and them speaking English. It still kind of played out like like most spaghetti western.
Mhm.
The stranger coming into town, taking care of business. The characters are like ambiguous, and it starts out with violent revenge, and it turns to redemption. So I think all those elements are there in most good Italian spaghetti westerns.
Oh
So I
yeah, I mean
think,
the story, it's basically they mix in some of the stuff with the Genji and the Heike, and they also reference War of the Roses, so they mix some of that stuff in from European history. But the basic story is essentially cribbed from Django, and which was cribbed from Fistful of Dollars, which was cribbed from
dollars.
Yojimbo.
Yes, it's almost going like full circle. It's gone full
It is,
circle.
yeah.
So it's start as you say, Yojimbo, Fistful of Dollars, Django, back to this, and it's they're all stealing from each other at this point. I think.
They are, yeah, it very much so, and it's so much so the fact that um, uh, Heihachi is, the little kid. He ends up at the end the credit
Yeah,
sequence at
they
the end
say
says that he goes to Italy and took on the name Django, and I'm like,
I'm like, really? It's like I'd like to see that movie. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
um,
Nice. Yeah, sorry. On you go.
I was gonna say like that was the I mean, the story's like we said, it's not an original story by any stretch of the
No,
imagination, but
no.
I don't know. I found the Heihachi stuff was actually, and the stuff with the family was kind of a drag on most of the movie for me. I honestly I wanted to know more about Ruriko, the BB and her past and all that. That's the movie I'm more
Yeah,
interested in seeing is about her.
yeah. Yeah, they lingered on her for a bit and then seemed to just forget about it, and they didn't really go
Mhm.
into too much detail with it. But in a way, but most female characters in spaghetti westerns are there for eye candy or, getting nude and then done away with. So
Yeah.
it's not he's kept that part of it, fairly true.
Well, there's also a bit of Once Upon a Time in the West. I mean, I know that was, I mean, it was Leone, but it wasn't an Italian movie, right? That's
Hmm.
when he came to America. But the whole thing with like in Once Upon a Time in the West, you had like the female main character who was like driving a lot of the story. I saw a lot of her in Nuriko and like the way
Yeah, yeah,
she acts. Like I think so. I think he was definitely influenced. The thing about it though is that it's just I did think it was kind of funny that you have these painted backgrounds at the beginning in the opening scene with Tarantino because there is kind of an artificial feel to a lot of the film in that way where
yes,
it
I
and
I
it,
agree. I agree. I think it started really artificially, and
mhm,
then as we went on, it got more realistic. But at the beginning, I couldn't understand the look at the aesthetics were all over the place. The
mhm.
voices, I don't even know what was Tarantino trying with the voice. His
I
voice
don't
was
know what
bad.
Tarantino was doing in this movie at all. Like he just
No, no.
I mean like
Yeah, yeah,
Tarantino is it's cool to have him in like a small part here and there, but I think there was a little bit too much of him in that opening sequence and then later when he comes back as the old man. I felt like that's a role that would have been better off for I don't even know, but someone who's I don't know if you could get Clint Eastwood to do that, but someone who
well,
has more of a connection to Western
why not?
films.
Why not get Franco Nero to do it? Franco Nero, the original
Oh
Django.
yeah, yeah, that would have been great.
That
That's right. He would have been perfect.
and he would have done it
He
easily.
would have done it. Well,
And
yeah,
then
I mean, he was in
you would have
Django
done
Unchained. That his great cameo in Django Unchained when Jamie Foxx
exactly.
spells
But
his name and he's like the D is silent. Franco Nero's just like I know.
yeah, but that would have made more sense. But I think at the time Tarantino was like he was like everywhere. And
Oh yeah.
obviously the Japanese filmmakers were like, no, let's get Tarantino. Everybody knows him. It'll sell the movie.
Well, I think this movie, probably more than any other of Miike's, was definitely made with an eye towards Western audiences, and I think that's a big reason why
Totally.
they chose Tarantino um, because this was before Django Unchained came out in a few years after this, but he
Yeah,
was
this is
already
five
well.
years before. This is 5 years before Django Unchained, and I think he
Okay,
was doing grind. I think he was doing Grindhouse at this time, or just a bit, either just finishing or just starting. I'm pretty sure.
yeah, yeah. Grindhouse came out, so yeah, that he was probably doing around the time it was filming that. That makes sense because I remember Grindhouse came out right before I left for Japan, I believe.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, that would make sense then because but he was known too because he had also done Kill Bill, which had a lot of like Western and samurai influences in it. So he was very people in America were very familiar with him, even though he hadn't done a full on Western by this point. Just like that
Mm.
sensibility was known in his work. So and they'd used his name to promote other stuff, like when he Sonatine, when that movie came out in America, it was actually as a bonus disc in another Tarantino movie. I can't remember which one, but it
Okay.
was it was like some other bonus disc. Might have been one of the Kill Bills, or it might have been Jackie Brown or something. But there was this bonus disc, and it was Sonatine, and because that was
Oh
the
wow.
only
Okay.
way Miramax would agree to release it is if they could put it in as a with Tarantino's movie. And also
Oh,
when they
okay.
brought Hero over, like Tarantino, you know, went up to the Wachowskis, the Weinsteins, and he told them, he wanted them to release this film, and they said, we'll release it, but only if we can put Quentin Tarantino Presents on the cover. And he's like, fine, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. So obviously that, to be fair, it's probably the reason the movie like sort of appeared to me as well, or maybe that I took notice of the movie is
Mhm.
because his name was attached in some way to it, and they probably just assumed that most audiences would sit up and take notice. I mean, if he wasn't attached, would you take notice of a random Japanese Western movie? Maybe not. Maybe
Well,
not.
yeah,
Me, even
I
though
would have, because I was interested in
I
it
would,
just because, yeah.
yeah,
But no,
you and I would have, but your
yes,
average
yeah.
cinema goer would not. So.
No, absolutely not. That's a very good point. Most people, especially because westerns hadn't really come back by that point. Like you'd had a few. You had 310 to Yuma had already been out by that point. But I think this was before True Grit even. So that wouldn't have really been on anyone's radar.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. True Grit was 2010, I think. So yeah,
okay, yeah,
it
that
was
sounds about
well
right. And
before that.
obviously before Django Unchained, like we had mentioned. So yeah,
Mhm.
westerns were not really on anyone's radar back then. So having Tarantino's name in it, and honestly, I have had this issue when I was talking to people and recommending Japanese movies, and they would ask me like, "Well, is
Mhm.
it dubbed in English?" And I said, "No, it's subtitled in English." And they're like, "I don't want to read."
Yeah,
So
I think it's
by
today's
having
game. Yeah.
by having that English voice cast in it, they made that reduces another barrier of entry to the film.
Well, I think even with it being in English, I still think your average cinema goer would have still struggled. I think
Mhm.
if we
Oh
got
yeah, absolutely.
I took you correct me if I'm wrong. I know it did really well here in Japan. I don't know how well it did internationally. I don't think it did tremendous business from what I
I don't
know.
know, because I honestly, because this it says it premiered in 2007, but I don't remember if it had a theatrical release or what. I'm looking up on IMDb trying to see if I can find some information about
Mhm.
the box office. I mean, I know it got mixed reviews. I do know that was something about it. But otherwise, I'm not really sure about the box office business.
Well, on Wikipedia it says budget was $3.8 million and box office 2.7, but I'm assuming that's just America. That's not Japan. I'm sure.
Yeah, usually they'll usually have like the American information, and then they'll have the the international market. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think they've only got one, so they don't have it. They don't have it all separated out. So.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything on it, for me. So yeah, I'm not sure how much money it made. But this was probably, I think at the time, this was probably would have been the biggest movie that had come out that he had done, at least the one that had gotten the most
Yes.
attention in advance. Because I think most of his movies people discovered after the fact.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
But it's, I tried comparing this too, because since then, and I mentioned this in the last episode too, but have you ever seen the Japanese version of Unforgiven?
No, no, I haven't.
So
No,
yeah,
is it a different time?
there's a Japanese remake of Unforgiven with Ken Watanabe in the Clint
Hmm.
Eastwood role, and
Okay.
it's an amazing example of adapting a Western story into a Japanese setting, because it's it's set after the Satsuma Rebellion, and so instead of the Clint Eastwood character being this aging gunfighter, he is Ken Watanabe, and he's a samurai who had fought in the rebellion and then had run off afterwards up to Hokkaido, where you know Japan was busy trying to take over in that time. So it deals a lot of stuff with like it uses the North and Hokkaido as the frontier that would have been the West in Unforgiven, and it also works in a lot of stuff with the Ainu people, and it's just this. It works in a lot of themes of the modernization of the Meiji era and all this stuff that really kind of plays in, and it's a great example of a director who clearly loved the original but wasn't being slavish to it. Like he was still trying to make it fit into a Japanese context. with this movie, I kind of feel like Miike had a checklist of things that he knew had to be in a spaghetti western slash samurai movie, and he was just kind of like checking them off one by one.
Yeah, I think now that you say that, I agree with you. He definitely is going, well, I need to have this in it. I need to have a certain type of music,
Hmm.
certain type of look. He obviously liked Corbucci's The Great Silence. That's why I think he put snow in at the
Hmm.
end because I just everyone says the setting for that movie is fantastic. So I think he's like, I like that. I'll put that in. So yeah. So maybe you could say he paid too much attention to trying to keep it, trying to keep it real to a spaghetti western instead of
Right.
maybe trying to just put his own spin on it.
My late co-host on my other podcast, he used to say, him and a buddy of his from another podcast they used to do, they used to have this saying they would say on the show. They're like, you can love your characters, but you can't love your characters. And I think when we
Yeah.
can modify that for Mike in this and say like, there's a set. I think you can love your genre movies, your influences, but you can't love them too much. And I think he went a
Mhm.
little bit overboard with the fan service aspect of trying to appeal to fans of spaghetti westerns. Whereas, you compare, even comparing it to Quentin Tarantino with like Django Unchained, he obviously has this love and reverence for that genre, but he still throws in enough of himself, and he still adds changes to it and makes it work in a different context. And I don't think
Yeah,
Mike was as focused on that.
yeah, I agree. Tarantino's, whether you like him or you don't, I think he's a good example because he's probably the only director that, I think he always strikes the right balance between
Hmm.
reverence, which is great, or fan service, and putting his own version on the screen. Because
Right.
you, initially, when I think when I and I remember when I first watched Kill Bill, and I think I went with my brother, and for the first 20 minutes, I'm like, oh, that's from this, that's from that.
Hmm.
He's stolen that. But once the movie starts, it's its own thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you can appreciate it for what it was without him, referencing too much. I mean, obviously, it's fun when he does the references to things, and it's great when you get it, but he doesn't go overboard with it, I think.
Right. Well, did you ever see the Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck?
Yes, I did.
That's a
Unfortunately,
good
yes, I did.
example of a director who was being too slavish to his fan service because every side character had to be named after a comic creator who worked on the Daredevil comics. You had to have all these little references to things in the comic books, and it just even me getting all those reference, I was overwhelmed by how fan servicey it was.
Yeah, I mean, I love Daredevil as a character. It's one of my favorite
Mhm.
Marvel characters, but even I was like, okay, enough. Because
Yeah,
there was I thought I think that there's another edit of that movie that is actually it makes
there
it
is.
the film a lot better. It makes it a lot better. Still not perfect by any stretch, but makes it a lot better. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you're right. They put too much.
Yeah, there's a director's cut that adds like 30 minutes of extra footage, and it is much better. The fan servicey stuff is still there though. That stuff's not edited down, unfortunately, but it's a little bit muted because of the extra runtime. Um, but yeah, that was a case too where I think that the director was just so focused on this checklist of I gotta have this, I gotta have this, I gotta have this, and I do get that sense that of Mike here. That being said, though, I mean this movie does look great. I mean, I think the
Oh,
costumes are great. The like we said, the action, the
mhm.
gunfights, all of those are amazingly well done.
Yeah, I agree
Eh,
with you. Yeah, the action, the music is fantastic. It looks fantastic. When the action gets going, it's superb,
mhm,
superb. I actually think there was parts of the gunplay action and the way the blood was flying that I think Tarantino liked, and you can see similarities between that and Django, but Django Unchained came afterwards. I
mhm.
still I Tarantino's obviously looked at that and went, oh, I like bits of this, and he's used it in Django Unchained.
Yeah, yeah, that would not surprise me at all. But also like just like the set design, right? The way that they
Mm.
set up the town, how it is like this interesting fusion of Japanese architecture with like this old west kind of mentality, and the design of the characters. Like I mean, I think um Isaiah looks freaking phenomenal in that white outfit with the samurai sword. Like he just looks badass as all hell.
Yeah, he's amazing. It looks like I mean, I actually think he looks like he stepped out of a comic book in a way. If
He
that makes any
does.
sense. He looks more like an anime character. with
Exactly.
the
I mean,
hair and the look. Yeah,
I feel like he looks like if you had a Final Fantasy game with an old west setting, he would one of the character there would be characters that look there would be at least one character that looks exactly like him.
totally. I totally agree with you. That's exactly what it. That's exactly the type of game that he would feature in a Final Fantasy style. Yeah, for sure. And even the main character, he looked like your archetypal,
Mhm.
man with no name. He did.
Yes.
It looked perfect. I mean, and in that sense, Miike got it right. With that, with the look of the characters, and as you said, the look of the town. So yeah,
Well, yeah, and also like Yoshino Kimura as Shizuka, like she's got that the very sensual dance scene, which is also kind of uncomfortable to watch because it comes like right after you get her story. So it it's almost like Mike's like, have a look at this hot chick, but I want you to feel bad while you're looking at her.
well, exactly. As I told you, I watched with my wife, and obviously she knows the actress more than I do. She's like, I've never seen her do anything like that before.
hmm
So it was obviously for the actress, it was a massive departure as well.
Yeah, she's mostly been in like she's done some voice work a lot, but she was also in I think she was also in a soap opera and a bunch of TV stuff too.
Right. Okay. So completely different to being in a Miike movie then.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, also Kaori Momoi, who plays Ruriko, she's also been in a bunch of stuff too, and I think this was a little bit of a departure from her. Like she's worked in like she was in the Yellow Handkerchief, she was in Kagemusha, and all these other types of much more like serious dramatic roles. And so then she does something like this where she plays this badass aging gunfighter.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So I mean, obviously, I think it's like Miike is like Tarantino in that way that he gets actors to do things to step out of their comfort zone, or get an
Mhm.
actor that you would never imagine for the role and get them to do something completely different.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, yeah, but overall, I think it's such a it looks so good, and I just feel like my biggest feeling with this movie is not that I don't like it in any sense of the
No,
imagination. I
no,
think
no.
I think it's very it's fun to watch, but it is a little bit long, and I just think the main thing is we just needed maybe not even necessarily a better story. I think even if you had just allowed the actors to perform in their native language, that
Mm,
alone would have made a world of difference in how this film comes
yeah.
across.
I know. I agree because it would still be a movie that I would recommend.
hmm
Fans of Japanese cinema, or spaghetti westerns to watch, because there's so much in it to enjoy. But again, if they spoke Japanese, I think the movie would flow better. And if they
Yeah,
maybe just like a trim of 10, 15 minutes, I'm talking about, it doesn't need, because the story itself is great, as you say, but it just needs a little bit of streamlining. And then I
yeah,
think you'd have something a lot more watchable, if that makes
yeah.
any sense. But
No,
there's
it
so
makes
much
total
to
sense.
enjoy
Yeah.
in it. But there's so much to enjoy in it. I mean, and I mean, it'd been ages since I'd seen it, and I really enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
it's quite funny. It's quite humorous as well. Which maybe you don't expect. There's little touches that made me chuckle
hmm
all the way through.
Yeah. I think if I was going to recommend people watch anything with, if people, I'd say if I was going to recommend a fusion of like samurai and Western, I would recommend the Japanese Unforgiven over this one. Yurusade Zarumono is the Japanese title.
Mm.
But,
Hmm.
but also maybe even like, Takeshi Kitano's Zatoichi, because that's another one where it's got this kind of Western influence in it too.
Yeah, I think Zatoichi's it's a much better. That's a much better movie than this. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's a similar. It has similar themes, though. I grant you. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean,
It's
if you want
something.
something, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. I think it's nice. This movie is nice in a way because I think it's something that it would appeal like cross genre. People that do like
Mhm.
like a violent western would enjoy this. If you like Italian exploitation, you would enjoy this because there's so
Mhm.
many things to enjoy that you can take from it. And if you like Japanese cinema, it's something different from maybe what you normally watch. So
Mhm.
it's got lots of different things. It's got lots of different things going for it.
I mean, I will give it to Mike. I will give Mike credit for this in swinging for the fences because this is not something that I think. I mean, I'd imagine he probably had to fight to get this movie made the way he wanted it to be made. So, I mean,
I'm sure.
I,
I'm
even if
sure.
I don't agree with the way he had done, having the actors do their own do everything in English, I think it was, I mean, kudos to him for giving it a chance and for trying something this ambitious.
Oh, totally. I mean, could you imagine that meeting with the producers? Oh, yeah, they're
Mm,
all going to talk English. Yeah, I mean, but again, I think he's one of these directors that the people just trust because they always know he's going to do something. They know the film's not going to be bad and it's going to have talking points. It's going to be interesting. So
yeah,
perhaps they trust him. It's like Tarantino. I don't ever imagine anyone says no because they just know that he's going to come up with something
right.
interesting and
Yeah,
different.
yeah, and I think that's a pretty good summation. Like, it's if you're gonna watch this movie, going with the understanding that it's may not be that the image you have in your mind of a spaghetti western mixed with the samurai movie, that movie in your mind is probably going to be a lot better than anything this movie could deliver. But it's still got some interesting things to look out for.
For sure, for sure. But
Um,
I would still recommend it though. It's still well
yeah,
worth watching. There's so many. There's more good than bad.
yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, it's just that drag in the middle that's difficult to get over.
There's that drag in the middle. Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't really sold on the whole stuff with Heihachi and all that. That whole storyline didn't really seem to connect very much with me. Um, and even like the gunman's situation, I had trouble kind of. I mean, you get little hints here and there, but I didn't think that they had really managed to connect his motivation for why he's so involved in this town. Um, I think we could have used a little bit more of that side of it as well. Although I
Sure.
will say that scene when, and I don't know if this was intentional or if this was just me reading into it because I'm a comic book fan, but there's a
Hmm.
famous the scene when he takes the gun out, he takes his whole gun belt off when he's in the room with Shizuka, and he lays down. There's a
Yeah.
close up of the gun on the holster. That made me think of a famous panel from Jim Steranko's Nick Fury Agent of Shield comic where he's got this love scene between Nick Fury and the Contessa, and the editors are like, you can't show them having sex or anything too suggestive, right? So he's like, okay, fine. So instead he does like this silent page of like these different panels. Like he has a close up of the Contessa kissing a rose. He has a close up of like them, like he has close ups of different things in the room, and the panel ends on Nick Fury's holster hanging on the bed with the gun inside it, and it's just so much more suggestive, and it made me think of that when I saw that close up in this movie.
Yeah, that scene does stick in my head though. I wasn't too sure if he was going for something there. Now that you've
Mm-hmm.
said that, maybe that's part of it. But does that? I think you see the close up of the gun and the holster at the start of the scene, and then I think she climbs on top of him.
I think so.
Essentially,
Yeah, yeah.
I can't. Yeah, yeah. But again, they didn't. But yeah, it could have been significant. Maybe that was the sort of symbolism he was going for.
Hmm.
This is what's about to happen.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
again, it's a Japanese movie, so they're not going to go too overboard, maybe. So
Right.
maybe
Not
that's
in a
what they went
mainstream
for.
movie. In a pink movie, it'd be a
No, not
different
a
story.
mainstream movie. Yeah, yeah, no, no, obviously, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
I want a general release movie isn't going to be too crazy.
Yeah. Okay, Nick. I think that's a good place to close up on. So, if you have anything
Okay.
to promote, anywhere you'd like to direct people to check you out at.
Genuinely, no, I don't because I do so little actual like film production stuff these days. There's nothing major. You can see uh, all the work I've done in the past is still available on most uh, Arrow Video releases. Anything with uh, Umberto Bava or Dario Argento for sure will have our extras on them. The ones I recommend the most is we did uh, a cannibal documentary, which was on I think the Grindhouse release of either Cannibal Holocaust or Cannibal Holocaust it was on, and we'd interviewed basically everybody that was involved in all these movies like Diodato
Hmm.
uh, and it's a really interesting sort of history of that very strange subgenre. And I'd been told that Tarantino and Eli Roth had seen it and liked it, and I don't know whether that's true, but it's something I choose to believe. So.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on. This is a fun discussion, and we'll have to
No, it
have you
was
come
good. I
back on in
really
the
enjoyed
future.
it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad we
Yeah,
were
it's
able to
the first time.
get this together finally because we've been talking about it
I know.
for like
I
over a
know.
year now. I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's the first time I've done a podcast. I've been wanting to do them, but it's very difficult to sort of, find the right subject and find the right
Mhm.
avenue to do it. So yeah, there's another a British podcast called, I think it's called Wild Wild Podcast, and they were quite interested to sort of talk about the whole Arrow video history thing. So that may be something that might happen in the next few months, but I'll wait and see.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I really enjoy I enjoy doing I've listened to quite a few of the podcasts, and I like the style you do it with, so it's been
Oh,
good.
thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, like we had on another guest recently who he had also been doing a Japanese film podcast that had
Mm.
they ended up stopping it, and it's just like there's this podcasting space. It's just like there's like this big Japanese movie size hole in the podcasting world, especially when it comes to live action stuff. There's just not a lot of people talking
Yeah,
about this, unfortunately.
anime is everywhere, but a
Yeah.
live action, yeah. Look, you say that though, but when I was trying to choose a movie, all the stuff that other things that I wanted to talk about had already been gone. So had already gone. So I was like,
Well, I think that's
then
one
I
of the
thought, let,
benefits. That's one of the benefits of doing a being like the only one doing the show is that if people want to talk about
yeah,
it, they got to come to me.
yeah. Because I'd like to talk about. I mean, maybe in the future, one of the other movies that I picked up when I was in America years ago was like the Ike Reiko movies. Sex and Fury that had
Mhm.
Christina Lindbergh in it. I don't know if you know if you know those. I mean, that film is unbelievable from start to finish. I'd never seen. I don't think I'd seen any. I mean, it's a complete exploitation, nudity, violence, everything, but it's amazing, absolutely amazing movie. So it's called Sex and Fury. So it's
Sex and
well
Fury.
worth
Okay.
looking at. Sex and Fury. You'll probably see the cover and you'll recognize it straight away. But
Probably.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's yeah, yeah. I think you know your stuff, so you'll probably recognize it. But it's really good, really good.
Okay. Cool.
But it's more down the exploitation line rather than
Hmm.
like proper cinema. If you know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on. We'll have to talk about having you come on again in a future season. But that does it for this episode of Japan on Film. JapanOnFilm.com is the website. You can find us also on Instagram and Blue Sky. At Japan on Film is the handle for both of those. Still technically on Twitter, though I don't spend a whole lot of time over there because Elon Musk is a psychopath. So don't expect a whole lot of interaction over there. Um, but also we have the We Made This podcast network where that we're part of. So check out the other great shows they've got. If you're like movies, like TV shows, lots of awesome stuff on the network. And also, I've got a comic book out. So if you're interested in superhero comics, please check out crowdfunder.com/Paragons Comic. That's crowdfundernoe.com/Paragons Comic. And you can, by the time this episode comes out, the crowdfunding will probably be complete, but you should be able to purchase copies from that link, and that'll be in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening, and hang on after the credits to hear about what's coming up next on the We Made This network. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the We Made This podcast network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, merchandise, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JapanOnFilm. If you'd like to help support the show, you can donate at japanonfilm.com, wemadethisnetwork.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find links with information about each guest and join the discussion on the We Made This Discord in the show notes of each episode. And now, listen to hear what's coming up next on the We Made This network.
You know what's tricky sometimes? Predicting who is going to win at the Oscars. You have to get yourself to a cinema to see all of the movies, or at least have all the streaming services so you don't miss a single one. You have to pay attention to all the precursor awards to see who is winning so far. The Golden Globes, the BAFTAs, they're the pretty obvious ones. But don't forget the Critics' Choice Awards, or the SAGs, or the DGAs, or the PGAs, or the Eddies, or the Gothams, or the AFI Top 10, or the National Board of Review. Ugh, exhausting, right? Or you can just join me for Academy Watch on the We Made This podcast network. I'm the host, Bo Nicholson, and I've been reading the trends, keeping the stats, and watching as many of the films as humanly possible, and I can tell you who the big players will be on the big night. Me and a guest will also be dissecting one of the key movies in the award season each episode. This year, it looks like Oppenheimer's to lose in several categories, including Best Picture. But can a mid-year release maintain momentum right to a Best Picture victory 2 years in a row? Or can Poor Things or The Holdovers stage a late season surge to steal the prize? Is it too early to discount the cultural phenomenon that was Barbie? Or Martin Scorsese's late career masterpiece, Killers of the Flower Moon? And what about the critical darling Past Lives? Whatever the movements are across the various precursors and throughout the season, you'll have the best available information if you subscribe to Academy Watch wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello everyone, I'm Robert Turnbull, producer and co-host of You Have Been Watching, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of British sitcom. I and my co-host Alex Lynch take you on a journey through the weird and wonderful world of British sitcoms, looking at a range of different subjects and different shows, including classics like Fawlty Towers. In the same way as David Brent and Alan Partridge and Victor Meldrew, Basil works best, for me, when he is actually dealing with arseholes. The more forgotten oddities like The Asylum.
I don't know if I was necessarily a fan of it. It was a bit kind of... If I'd seen that on the Paramount Comedy Channel when I hadn't known who any of these people were, I probably wouldn't have necessarily enjoyed it.
And we even have top 10s like favourite sitcom theme tunes, or episodes dedicated to a subject like the quirk of recasting in sitcoms. Weirdly, I feel like the examples that I've been able to find of like properly recasting characters, like bringing new actors in to play the same characters, they tend to be bad sitcoms that didn't last very long. So do please come and give us a listen on the We Made This network. We're available on all podcast platforms and on Twitter at YHBWPod. So come and give us a follow, give us a listen, send